So one big issue for the MRAs is they say that there's a huge problem with male disposability, or society's putting men in dangerous positions, whether it be war, dangerous jobs, just overall that they're the more disposable gender. Do you think that's true?
I think there's no question historically. First of all, women have been prohibited up until just this past year serving in combat in the armed forces. By the way, the feminist movement has fought for knocking out those laws that prohibited women from serving in combat. The question is, do we want women or men in war? You know, putting them out there on the front lines. We shouldn't want to put men out there or those who have sons any more than they would put their daughters out there. But if we're going to put people out there, especially in an all-volunteer army, women should have the chance to go out there too, because it's those jobs that lead to the ability to promote up the ranks. And if a woman wants to make a career out of being in the military, why should she be stopped from doing anything she wants to do and is capable of doing simply because she's female? Up until just this year, that's been the law. That is now changed almost completely under President Obama and his Department of Defense. So we're going to see women serving in a lot of different capacities than they had before. But why should our society, why should humankind still be relying on brute force to kill other human beings? I mean, that's the real question that these men rights activists should be asking. Not should they be the ones out there taking the bullets, but why should anybody? I mean, and again, I go back to maybe if there were more women and equal numbers of women at these decision-making tables, we would not be so fast to go to war. I mean, the people who are voting to go to war are men. I mean, that's who they should be arguing with, not feminists. Feminists as a whole have been very much a part of the peace movements in this country and worldwide. In fact, there's a standing resolution that's been adopted by the United Nations that peacekeeping delegation should be half women. We should have half women at these tables negotiating for peace and disarmament and peaceful resolution to conflict, not war. War has been a man's game, and the production of weapons has been what men have done throughout history, throughout the millennia. And so having more women in positions of power might begin to alter that. It would begin to alter that. Beyond that, though, women want to be police officers. You know, as men tend to want to be police officers because they see the shoot 'em up and the exciting chases and the paramilitary equipment they get to use. That's not what policing is. Policing is developing the trust of your community, of citizens in your community, and helping figure out problems. And that's what women like to do, because women have been raised to be problem solvers in many cases, and social workers. And so if you survey women and men who are in police agencies, the men disproportionately say they wanted to become a police officer because of the cops and robbers aspect of that. Women say they want to be police officers because they want to stop violence against women, they grew up in violent households, or they come out of a social worker mentality. They want to help people. And that is what policing ought to be. I just saw some police recruitment videos that are being used right now to recruit people to be police officers, and it's showing these paramilitary operations and these police in riot gear and throwing grenades, and you're thinking that's a war video. But some police agencies think of themselves as these paramilitary operations. That's not what policing is. So men should object because it's very ineffectual in stopping crime or in solving crime. You can't do that with paramilitary mentality. You need a whole different approach. And women want to do that. Women would like to be firefighters. Too much of our firefighting equipment and our firefighting methods have relied on brute strength. instead of on technology and science. Maybe we should invest in more ways to get the water to the fire that doesn't require a man who's can press however many pounds and is 250 pounds himself and pure muscle trying to get up a ladder with a fire hose on his back. Why is this good? Why not invent better ways of just getting the water to the fire? Isn't that what putting out a fire is about anyway? So, men have created a lot of mythology around their role in society as the protectors, as the strong protecting the weak. And of course, they're the strong and females are the weak. Whether it's in war or in policing or in politics or wherever, we need to get rid of those mythologies. Those are unfair to men because it does put men in a position that potentially could be dangerous. And it's underutilizing the other half of the population's brain power and skills. And we should think, how do we organize our societies differently? How do we organize our lives differently, where women and men can pursue their interests, can pursue living their lives the way they want to, and not having it dictated by this mythology of what's a real man and what's a real woman. That's really what feminism is struggling to change, is how we view the genders, how we view men, how we view women. These outdated roles are not good for either one. It's not good for men, and it's not good for women.
So it sounds like what the MRAs are upset with, if they teamed up with feminists, they would make it better, right?
Well, it depends on how they view the world, I guess. This rise of the men's rights movement really paralleled in some ways the rise of this contemporary feminist movement, the reactivation of the feminist movement. During World War II and during the 40s, in many, post World War II is what I should say. I messed all that up. Anyway, during World War II, because the men were all shipped off to fight the wars in Europe and Asia, women had to take on a lot of roles in society. We all know about Rosie the Riveter. Women went to work in the factories, not just making, tanks and missiles and uniforms, but all kinds of things that up until then men held those jobs. And then the men came home, and women were pushed out of the workforce, told to go home. And by the way, during World War II, government-funded childcare was widely available. It was everywhere, and employers were putting in childcare centers, because if you were trying to run a factory 24/7, you had to have someplace for children. And so, funny how when you want to, business and government can figure out how to provide childcare for everybody, but when you don't want to, they don't. And women were told to go home and have children. And this whole mythology of woman married, dependent on the man, having children, that whole thing has haunted us into the 21st century. And it cheats women and it cheats men. But the men's rights movement really got going as women began to make gains. And some men have felt threatened by the opportunities that have been opened up to women. And I don't know if it's because some of them feel threatened that they now have to compete with a lot more people for their jobs. They now can't get into the best schools if a woman or a girl has better grades. Before, you could say it didn't matter what your grades were. Only 10% of the incoming law class can be women. All these other positions, 90% of the class will be men, whether you're qualified or not. Suddenly, you're now having to compete with a lot more people. In the job market, you're now competing with women as well as men. So maybe there's a lot of men who don't like that. And maybe there was a lot of men who liked the lives their fathers or their grandfathers lived, where a wife was expected to wait on her husband, to maintain the household, to provide him his food, to take care of his children, to nurse his elderly parents, to do everything in this realm of domesticity, while he could go out and be part of the real world. So maybe he resents that. Maybe he resents now that his wife is working and has insisted that he hold up his end of the bargain at home. So that could be part of what's fueling it. Is, think about it. Grandfather's generation probably had it pretty well, right? All of his needs, his shirts were ironed, all of that was always taken care of. Well, grow up. Assume responsibility for yourself. And realize the world has changed. And as much as the MRAs would like things to go back to the way they were, and use the argument that women have an advantage now, no person looking at the data can possibly say women have an advantage. We're just beginning to get a level playing field here. It's not tilted in our favor, I can tell you that. And they know it. They know it. But it's the constant distortion of the data. It's the spinning of a situation to make it look like women are somehow getting ahead, getting an advantage they don't deserve. It's part of the backlash. Women have made this tremendous progress, and there's this huge pushback now. And the men's rights movement has been part of the backlash. In fact, if you go back through history, hundreds and hundreds of years, there's been this gain that women will make, and then this horrific backlash. And it's because our world is still run by men. That is the reality. We can call it the patriarchy. The reality is our world is still largely controlled by men, whether it's heads of governments and in the parliaments and the state and the legislatures, whether it's corporate power. We still live in a world where men control most of the assets, most of the decisions are made by men, and the rest of us cope with it. And the feminist movement, whether it's here in the US or the feminist movement in every country of the world, and there's an indigenous feminist movement in every country, even in Saudi Arabia, where women are fighting for just the right to drive a car, where women are fighting for the right to work in paid employment, or in wherever. Women are fighting for their rights, and the backlash to that is that it is changing life, it is changing the way societies function, and there is a class of men who feel that they're now going to be cheated.